right, welcome back to Chat Like a Native. We always love diving into these topics that can be tricky even for native speakers.
Yeah.
And today we are tackling how to disagree politely in English. So stick around for these techniques that can really make all the difference. I think this will be a really useful one.
Oh, yeah. It is. It's really interesting how politeness, especially in disagreements, isn't really about backing down. It's more like just getting your point across in a really good way.
Okay, so how does that work?
Yeah.
How does being polite make you, a better debater?
Well, if you think about it, when you feel like someone's attacking you or, doesn't really respect what you're saying, you probably just close off and stop listening.
Right.
You're not really open to hearing them. But when you approach the disagreement in a way that's respectful and you're trying to show that you respect the other person, then that's going to create an environment where you can both actually talk to each other. And I think that's one of the secrets to being able to communicate really well in English and in any language, really.
Right, so it's like you're building a bridge instead of putting up a wall.
Exactly. And that's where the magic happens. Instead of it turning into a shouting match, you're actually having a good back and forth, like a real exchange of ideas.
Right.
Yeah.
So
there are actually some specific techniques that you can use to sort of build that bridge.
Okay, great.
And one of the things that we came across in our research is this idea of softening language.
Softening language. I like that. What does that mean?
Yeah. Basically, you're trying to use specific phrases and words that kind of cushion the blow.
Mm-hmm.
So instead of saying something like, you're wrong, which can sound kind of harsh, you can try saying something like, I understand where you're coming from, but...
Oh, so you're acknowledging their perspective before you present your own. Mm-hmm. It's a way of saying, hey, I respect your opinion, even if I disagree with it.
Exactly. That's a really good way to put it. And this all ties back to this idea of saving face, which is really important, actually, especially in many cultures where respect and dignity, are super important. So when you use softening language, you help the other person feel like you've heard them. You're not dismissing them completely.
Right. So it makes them more open to what you have to say.
Right. It's pretty powerful.
That's so interesting. It's like a secret code to unlock smoother communication.
It is. You can use this in every kind of situation, whether you're just chatting with your friends or if you're in some kind of formal debate.
Oh, wow. Okay, so there's a lot more to this than just memorizing some polite phrases. It's a whole communication style, isn't it?
It is. It's not just what you say, but how you say it.
Yeah.
Your tone of voice, body language, all of that plays a big role, especially if you're learning English. Even small things can be easily misunderstood.
Oh, I know. I remember when I first started learning English, I was so focused on getting the grammar right, all the vocabulary. And, I kind of forgot about all that other stuff, tone and body language.
Yeah.
And it definitely led to some awkward situations.
Yeah, I can imagine. But the good news is there are some tips you can use to really master this.
Okay, I'm ready. Lay it on me.
All right. First of all, it might sound obvious, but try to speak slowly and clearly, especially when you disagree with somebody. It gives you time to actually think before you speak.
Mm-hmm.
You can choose your words carefully, and it helps the other person actually understand what you're trying to say.
Yeah, it's like you're hitting the pause button before you might say something that you'll regret.
Exactly. And another thing is pay attention to your body language.
Okay.
Don't cross your arms. Try to maintain a really open, relaxed posture.
Right, because if your arms are crossed, it kind of makes you look closed off, right?
Exactly. You look defensive.
Yeah.
And you'd be surprised, but a little smile can go a long way, even as you're disagreeing.
Oh, I never thought about that. Smiling while disagreeing. But yeah, it shows that you're not trying to, attack the other person.
Right. You're showing that you're coming from a good place.
Right. Okay, that's really interesting. I'm starting to see how all these small things can really have a big impact on how we talk to each other.
Absolutely.
Is there anything else?
Oh, yeah. There's one more thing I wanted to highlight. This is actually pretty important. And that is the power of reflecting and paraphrasing. Making sure you really understand what the other person's saying.
Yeah, it's like a two-way street. You're expressing your viewpoint, but you're also making sure that you're listening to the other person.
Exactly. And paraphrasing is a great tool for that. It shows that you're actually listening and trying to understand. You're not just waiting for your turn to speak.
Right. Can you give us an example of how that might sound in a conversation?
Sure. Let's say someone's complaining about a project that's been delayed, and they're frustrated about it. Instead of jumping right in with your opinion, you could say something like, so it sounds like you're feeling really frustrated because this delay is going to impact X, Y, and Z. Is that right?
Right.
Something like that.
Wow. That's a really good way to show that you're listening and to give the other person a chance to clarify.
Exactly. It's a win-win. You're deepening your understanding, and it really helps to build that connection, even in the middle of a disagreement.
This is all making me wonder about how cultural differences play into all this. I imagine it could be kind of a minefield, trying to disagree politely in English, especially when it's not your first language.
Oh, you're absolutely right. Cultural differences can definitely make things tricky. It's one of the things that makes this whole topic so interesting.
Okay. So how do you even begin to address that?
Yeah, it's a big topic, but we'll definitely dive into all of that in our next segment.
Okay. I'm really looking forward to that.
Don't worry, we'll get into those cultural differences and how to handle them with confidence.
Fantastic.
Stay tuned.
Okay.
All right, welcome back to Chat Like a Native.
Yes, welcome back.
I'm excited to pick up where we left off and talk more about those cultural differences.
Right, yeah, because it could feel like a whole other level of complexity when you're learning English.
Absolutely. But, just having some awareness of this is already a big step forward. Imagine you're at a party and someone says, "Hey, I love your shirt."
Mm-hmm.
In one culture, you might say something like, "Oh, this old thing," like you're downplaying it.
Yeah.
But in another culture, you might just say, "Thank you, I appreciate that." Like a very direct acceptance.
I see what you mean.
Yeah.
Yeah, so someone could easily get the wrong idea depending on, where they're from.
Exactly. And these kinds of little differences, they happen in disagreements too.
Right.
For example, some cultures are very direct, like being straightforward with your disagreement is seen as being honest and respectful.
Yeah.
But in other cultures, that could actually be considered rude.
Right.
So they might use a more indirect approach where they kind of hint at their disagreement without actually saying it directly.
Okay. So how do you figure out all these unspoken rules when you're, in a new culture? It seems impossible.
It is kind of tricky, but the good news is you don't have to memorize a whole rule book.
Right.
It's more about being mindful and observant and adaptable. Just pay attention to how people around you are communicating, both what they say and also their body language. You'll pick up a lot just by observing.
Okay, that makes sense. So it's like being a cultural detective. You're looking for clues and trying to figure out the best way to approach things.
That's a great way to put it.
But what about like those times when you're thrown into a conversation and you don't have time to observe?
Right.
What's a good strategy then?
That's a really good question. I would say in those situations, it's always best to kind of play it safe.
Okay.
Start with a more indirect approach. You can use those softening phrases that we were talking about earlier, like, "I see your point, but," or "I understand where you're coming from, however."
There are those subtle cues that show respect.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then as you're talking to the person, you can sort of gauge their reaction,
Right.
and then you can adjust your style. Like if they seem open to a more direct way of talking, then you can maybe be a little more assertive.
Okay.
But if they seem a little uncomfortable with that, then just stick with that softer approach.
So you're saying it's all about reading the room,
Exactly.
finding that right balance so you can communicate without offending anybody.
Exactly. And it's interesting because even within the English-speaking world, there are differences,
Really?
Like somebody from New York City might be much more direct than somebody from the South,
Oh, wow.
where politeness and indirectness are much more valued.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I hadn't even thought about that.
Yeah. There are so many nuances to this.
Right.
It really is a valuable skill to develop, especially, if you're learning English as a second language. It can really help you connect with people from all different backgrounds.
It's almost like a superpower, right?
It is. It's like a secret weapon for building bridges across cultures.
Okay. We mentioned reflecting and paraphrasing before.
Oh, yeah.
Can you remind us again why that's so important, especially with all these cultural differences?
Oh, it's crucial. Remember we were saying that different cultures have different communication styles?
Right.
Some are what they call high context.
Okay.
That means they rely a lot on unspoken cues and shared understanding,
Okay.
while others are low context, where communication is much more explicit and direct.
Yeah.
And paraphrasing can really help bridge that gap.
Oh, that's such a good point. It's like making sure everybody's on the same page no matter where they're coming from.
That's right. So, for example, let's say you're talking about a project and you're talking with a colleague from a high context culture.
Okay.
They might not come right out and say what they're thinking or if they disagree with something.
Right.
But if you really listen carefully and paraphrase what they do say, then you might uncover those hidden meanings.
That's interesting. So it's like you're reading between the lines.
Exactly. And when you do that, you're showing that you're really trying to understand, which builds trust.
Okay, that's really insightful.
And it's not just for cross-cultural communication. It works in any disagreement, even with people from your own culture.
That's true.
Because we all have different ways of communicating.
Right, even within our own families sometimes.
Exactly. And this is where some of those advanced techniques come in.
Okay.
Like, it's not just about being polite, it's about understanding the psychology of communication.
Okay, this is getting really interesting. What are these advanced techniques?
Well, for one, there's the art of framing and reframing arguments.
Okay, what does that mean?
It means understanding how the words you choose can shape how the other person sees things, you know?
Right, so it's not just what you say, but how you say it.
Exactly. Like, imagine you're choosing the right frame for a painting.
Mm-hmm.
You want something that will show it off in the best way.
Right.
So instead of making it a battle of right versus wrong, you could try it and make it a search for the best solution.
So instead of saying, you're wrong, you could say, I see your point, but I wonder if there are other options that might work better for everyone.
Exactly. You're shifting the focus from winning or losing to finding something that works for everybody.
Yeah, it takes the pressure off.
Yeah, exactly. And it makes it much more likely that you'll actually be able to resolve the disagreement.
Okay. What else? What other advanced techniques are there?
Another really powerful one is using persuasive language. This is where you use storytelling, emotional intelligence, appealing to the other person's values.
So it's not just about stating the facts.
No, it's about connecting with them on a deeper level.
Right. So you're trying to make your argument resonate with them emotionally.
Exactly. You want to paint a picture with your words, use metaphors and analogies.
That makes a lot of sense.
This is starting to sound really complex.
It is. It's not just about learning a few phrases. It's like a whole new way of thinking and communicating.
And the best part is you can keep getting better at it,
Yeah.
The more you practice, the more natural it becomes.
Well, I'm feeling really inspired now. I feel like we've gotten all these new tools to deal with difficult conversations.
That's great. And remember, it's not about being perfect or avoiding conflict altogether.
Right.
It's about approaching these disagreements with empathy, wanting to understand the other person.
Absolutely.
Wow, we've really covered a lot of ground today.
We have, from the basic stuff to cultural differences and even these advanced techniques.
Yeah, it's been a great deep dive. Maybe it's time to take a little break.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
We'll be back soon with even more insights to help you master the art of polite disagreement.
Sounds good. Stay tuned, everyone. All right, welcome back to Chat Like a Native. We've been talking about how to disagree politely, and we've covered so much. From softening language to those cultural differences, it's really fascinating.
It is, isn't it? And, the more we talk about this, the more I realize that disagreeing politely, it's really all about good communication skills.
Yeah, absolutely. Like we're uncovering all these layers. It's amazing.
Yeah, it's a good way to put it. And before we finish up our deep dive today, I wanted to bring up one more thing.
Okay, what's that?
It's knowing when to just step back.
Mm-hmm.
Because even with all these great techniques, sometimes you just have to agree to disagree.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, sometimes you just can't get the other person to see your side, no matter how hard you try.
Exactly. And it's important to recognize when that's happening. It's kind of a balancing act.
Okay.
You want to be assertive, but you also want to be respectful.
Right.
You don't want to push things too far and damage the relationship.
So how do you know when it's time to just, let it go?
You have to pay attention to those little cues. Like, are you going around in circles? Are you repeating the same points over and over?
Right.
Or is it starting to feel more like a competition than an actual conversation? And are things getting heated? Mm-hmm. If you notice any of that, it might be time to back off a little.
Okay. So what do you say when you decide to do that? It seems kind of awkward to just stop talking, doesn't it?
You're right. You don't want to just shut things down completely. You want to acknowledge the other person's point of view.
Right.
Even if you don't agree with them, you could say something like, I appreciate you sharing your perspective, and I've definitely thought about what you've said, but I still see things a little differently.
Okay, yeah.
But I respect your opinion. Something like that.
That's good. It shows respect, but you're still being honest about how you feel.
Exactly. You're saying, we might not agree on this particular thing, but I still value our relationship.
Right, right. And you know what? Sometimes agreeing to disagree can actually be a good thing.
Oh, absolutely.
It gives everyone a chance to, think things over, maybe come back to it later with a fresh perspective.
It's like planting a seed. Even if it doesn't grow right away, maybe it'll sprout later on.
I like that. Well, this has been such a great deep dive. I feel like we've learned so much about how to handle disagreements in a way that's both effective and respectful.
Me too. It's not just about learning a few phrases, it's about shifting your mindset and really wanting to understand where the other person is coming from.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So to everyone listening, remember, disagreeing politely, it's not about winning or losing.
Yeah.
It's about building stronger relationships, even when you don't see eye to eye.
Well said. Keep practicing, keep learning, and most importantly, keep those conversations going.
That's great advice. And that's it for this episode of Chat Like a Native. We hope you found it helpful, and we'll see you next time.
See you then.